would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land, and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Liz and Erica. Thanks for joining me. I love these bonus episodes. They're so fun. I love being able to get multiple people in the same virtual room this is the first time that you guys have met. And so I love, just connecting different groups of people. Today is a bonus episode. As I said, we're going to be talking all things as typical religious trauma, but with a particular focus on the body and the disconnection that so often comes from religious trauma and being involved in a organized religion or a high control space, and ways to navigate that disconnection and become more embodied and rebuild that connection back to your body. So I'm joined by the wonderful Liz Milani and Erica Webb. And so I might start by just getting them to, I'll just get you guys to give a brief introduction as to who you are, and what brings you to this space. So I'll throw to you, Liz, first, because you're on the top of my screen.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Sam. I'm so excited to be here with you and Erica. My name's Liz, obviously. I used to be a pastor. I was a pastor's kid and a pastor myself for more than a decade until we were thrown into a season of deconstruction that was involuntary, completely terrifying and unsettling. And this was a decade ago that we left the church. Deconstruction wasn't really a word. We didn't really know what was happening to us. And it took us a little while to find our feet and figure out what was going on. But since then, we run a social media community space called The Practice Co. It started off as a Bible devotion, a daily devotional, while we were still pastors in the church. And it's definitely morphed and evolved along with my own journey to be a space where we reclaim our own sense of faith, our own sense of connection to ourselves, God, and the earth, and create our own faith pathway, whatever that looks like, with an emphasis on post-church deconstruction vibe. I don't know what else to say. There we go. Over to you, Erica.
Awesome. Thank you for having me too, Sam. It's really lovely to be here. So I'm Erica, and I am a somatic exercise coach. I've been teaching mindful movement for 14, 15 years, something like that. And I'm a counsellor as well. And my background with religious trauma was that I grew up in the church. So I was born into a Christian home, just knew nothing other than that. And I left the church and left religion completely. Like, it was kind of like one fell swoop. When I was about 18 or 19 years old, from memory. And so it's been an interesting thing for me to then, as an adult, notice I'm going to say, like, shadows and echoes of the way that I was raised and how that's created some challenges for me as a grown-up, and navigating what the world looks like outside of control and really black and white rules. So yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to talking about all of this.
Amazing. So obviously when we talk about trauma, we talk about it in terms of that it lives in our body. We don't think our way out of trauma. We process and heal trauma through the body. And too often we see that those who come out of high control and fundamental spaces have a disconnection from the body. I know that in the church that I was a part of, the body is simply a vessel. It's just like worldly and fleshy, and despite the irony that it's also a temple and you're supposed to look after it. But we won't get into the irony of that. um, but it's just a way for you to move through the world. It's temporary. And so it's not necessarily trustworthy. And so you start to develop a disconnection from your body. But I'm going to throw back to Erica and wonder whether you can speak to what that body disconnection actually looks like in relation to trauma and why we hold trauma in our body.
Yeah, it's such a complex area, so I will do my best to wrap some words around it that I feel good about. I think in the context of religious trauma in particular, the disconnect that you talk about there is really about disowning the wisdom of the body. We're kind of taught in religious spaces and in the church that we can't trust ourselves, right? We can't trust our instincts, we can't trust our inner dialogue, and we can't trust our body. I was very heavily impacted by purity culture, and I think that comes into this a lot, that often our natural bodily functions are shameful. And so what we do is we have this disconnect between what we feel and what we're told is right. And so the most effective way to deal with that is to just live from here up, because the body is always communicating with you, right? Always. You can't actually turn that off. The way that your brain and body exchange information is happening whether you can interpret it or not. And so it's less about your body not being able to give you information, and it's more about kind of not being able to interpret it, not having that kind of inner ear to go, oh, that's what my body is telling me. That's the wisdom of my body. It's kind of like, hang on, I can't trust this. And we often will outsource to something outside of ourselves to know what is right. And that will often be a man, and it will often be something very much outside of who we are. And so there can be a lot of fear, I think, associated with who, the messages that can come from our body, because we really do believe that we're unable to trust them. And so when you think about trauma living in the body, really what we're talking about is a nervous system response. Trauma lives in the body because the body doesn't forget what has been a threat to our survival in the past. And so we will go into protective mode. We will do things that are really designed to protect our space in the world, our survival in the world, which is about social connection as much as it is about, just staying alive. And so that trauma will kind of live in our body as a pattern of protection. And so it might be that we spend time kind of in this almost like fetal position, walking around the world, kind of trying to protect ourselves. And we might not even know that we are doing that. And there's just a lot to be learned from how our body responds to our environment, how our body responds to our thoughts, how our body responds to the structures around us. And if we aren't trusting of our ability to listen to that information and act on it, then that's where the disconnect is. The disconnect is, there's information here, I can't access it, so I'm going to live from here up and try to think my way through it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've heard obviously a lot of people talk about trauma being in the body, but I really love the term that it's a pattern of protection. I really love that. I don't think I've heard that particular phrase before, and I think it is a really great way also reminding us that our body is not against us. Like, it's not working for our harm. It's actually trying to protect us from what it sees as harmful and unsafe. And so I love that. I think that's a really great way of describing why it's living in our body. Liz, I know that you grew up, obviously, if I've obviously already interviewed Liz. So if you want more about Liz's story, head back to that episode. But what was the way that the body was viewed for you growing up in a extremely, Pentecostal space? And how did you see that disconnection in your own life growing up in that space?
Well, it was exactly what Erica has said. I was taught from a very young age. My parents became Christians when I was a toddler. So the messaging for me about my body from, 2 and 3 up was that it's just a shell. It's just a means to an end. It was definitely like so many different angles. Purity culture was an influence. I remember not being allowed to go to sex education classes at school, and I would be pulled out of those classes, and I would go to a class at the church, which was run by our senior pastor, who was a man, and very archaic kind of, information about all of the different things about the body. So from right then at the beginning, my education around the body, its functions, how it works, was limited and delivered to me through a very narrow lens, even to the point where I got my period when I was 10 and I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me. And I felt so much shame. I had to go to my friends and nick tampons and pads off them. Sorry if that's too much information, but this is the very real way in which some of these practices can influence and impact our bodies and our relationship with our bodies. And so, everything from desire is wrong. You can't trust your body. You can't trust your thoughts. You can't trust the sensations that arise. So the nervous system kicking in to try and protect us, to try and keep us safe. Because we were taught to not trust our bodies, any attempt to interpret sensation in our body, there was a disconnect even there. So to try and figure out, why am I afraid? Why do I feel excited? You just were taught not to even go there. And so you were separated from that from the very beginning, if that makes any sense at all. And then even into areas like sickness and illness. I remember being a teenager and I had migraines all through high school, and just being taught that, you got to pray about it. You got to go to the altar. Maybe there's sin in your life. So even reasons around physical illness, sickness, things that were happening in your body weren't seen with critical awareness. They were seen through a lens of, you've got to pray about it. There must be something wrong with you spiritually. And this is why you're having a physical problem. So the answer to it was never look at yourself physically and see what's happening. It was go to God and get that whiz-bang miracle healing out the front. And if that hasn't happened to you, well, then maybe God has you sick for a reason. Like all of these silly things that can come around with that. I remember when I was 21, one of my best mates died of a brain tumor. And I saw him the day before he died, went to his house and visited him, and it was horrific. Went to church the next day. He died through the night. Members of our church had heard about it, and they were all saying to me, oh, it must have been his time. God planned it. And sorry if this is triggering for anybody, but I just remember thinking to myself, I saw him the day before. God would never plan this. Like, if God is our loving God, who is all powerful and almighty and gracious, what's happened to my friend is not of God at all. So there was a disconnect there, all through my toddler years, my tween years, my teen years, my early adult years. There was such a disconnect with my body, not just interpreting the signs, but interpreting illness and sensation and desire and the nervous system reaction. There was a huge disconnect between all of those. Does that answer your question? I can't even remember what it is now. Sorry, Sam.
Of course it is. Of course it answered the question. I mean, it is like there's just so much there that we could unpack in terms of like the bypassing, the over spiritualization of very normal things that are happening in the body. Purity culture has a lot to be responsible for in terms of it's fucked so many people up, and not just women and queer people, like men as well. Purity culture sucks for everybody, basically.
Yeah.
And it just essentially is, rooted that your body is not your own. For women, that it is, it's just for the purpose of, male desire and sexual reproduction, essentially. And so, yeah, it's just all of those things that are reinforcing to not listen to your body. Yeah. And so, okay, I want to define something a little bit, because I know that we're going to throw around the word somatic quite a bit, I would imagine, moving forward. And there are some people who would have never heard of that term, or would hear it thrown around in terms of like therapy jargon and things like that, and perhaps don't necessarily know what that means. So, Erica, when we use the term somatic, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so it gets used in a lot of different ways, to be honest. But really what it means, if we refer to something as somatic, we're referring to something of the body. So that's the easiest way to think about it. If you hear the word somatic, people are just using a kind of fancy scientific word that really just means of the body. What I think is helpful to recognize, though, is that it gets used in very different contexts, and it gets it kind of gets grabbed and used for various things. So, like, I'm a somatic exercise coach, and I'm a counselor who works through a somatic lens. But I'm not, for instance, a somatic experiencing therapist, which is quite a different thing. So when you hear the word somatic, and when you hear the notion of somatic therapies, they're not all the same thing, even though the word really just means of the body. So I think it's a little bit like walking into a yoga class. You might think you have an idea of what you're about to walk into, and then find out that it's something completely different, because it's a broad term used to describe a lot of things that kind of fit under an umbrella. But I think when it's used in a therapeutic context, there will be people who use it with a kind of fairly structured system. But the way that I think about it, and the way that I use it in my own practice, for myself and for my clients, is to really reconnect. It's really that reconnection piece of, can you feel what's happening in your body? Can you be kind of like a co-participant in that communication that's always happening? I love to think about the way that the body and the mind connect as literally being a conversation, conversation between like beloveds, conversation between friends, people who, two entities that are really one, but who really have each other's best interests at heart. They adore each other. And so I think of somatics as that. It is reconnecting the pieces so that you have access to the wisdom that your body possesses. I think one really beautiful quote to describe why somatic practices can be so important is a quote from Deb Dana, and she's very big in the world of polyvagal theory, and she's a therapist, and she says, the brain narrates, or the mind narrates, what the nervous system knows. And that really speaks to the fact that the body holds wisdom often far before the mind. And so a lot of somatic work is about being able to say, well, what does my body know that my mind's trying to make sense of, that I can perhaps be a little bit more curious about the body's actual needs rather than my mind's interpretation.
Yeah, I think it was, I remember when I first learnt that the vast majority of the messages that are sent through our body are sent from our body to our brain, and not the other way around, was just, I remember learning that and going like, oh, okay, like we've got everything back to front. Like it's completely the wrong way around. Even to, when I'm also not a somatic therapist by, in training, but I work similarly in terms of like, you know, I understand that trauma is in the body and we have to process it that way. And so sometimes for the first time when I'm working through a somatic lens, I'm going like, what does hunger feel like? Like, let's just pull it back to things that are like super neutral, things that don't have an emotional connotation for a lot of people. You know, we don't often shame people or judge ourselves for being hungry unless there is, you know, some other trauma or complex things at play. But what does hunger feel like? Because too often we, you know, we eat out of routine or we eat out of our schedule, and we don't often eat because we're actually hungry. And if we do, it's an automatic like grumbling of the stomach, right? But actually, there can be so many other things that are happening in our body when we simply get hungry. And that's before we go down any path of, you know, what shame or guilt or resentment or fear feels like in the body. Like, what does hunger feel like? And so, yeah, I love, you know, that idea of having a conversation with your body and going like, what are you trying to tell me? And I know that, you know, from chatting to Liz about her story, that your body told you very loudly when you left the church that things were not okay. Um, what was that like for you?
It was really scary, to be honest, because up until then, I was, I think, in my early 30s when we left, so maybe 30, 31. I just had my second baby. And so there was a lot happening for me physically anyway, that I may have missed some of these early signs of there was something wrong. But I was taught so heavily to disconnect myself from what was happening. And if something negative was happening in my body, to fight it and to see it as, oh, my body's not going to keep me from the Lord's work. Do you know what I mean? Even volunteer culture, should have said this earlier, but volunteer culture in the churches, there used to be a saying slung around our church, we'll sleep when we're dead. I'm like, okay, well, we're all going to get there sooner if we don't sleep while we're here. So, you know, that's what I think now. But back then, I saw it as a spiritual, I don't know, pedestal, how far you could push your body in order to fulfill the call of God on your life. And I was definitely in that space. When I was pregnant, I worked up until the day I gave birth in both pregnancies, and then went back to work weeks later and saw that as a, you know, I won something. Look at me, I'm doing it, and I'm putting my body on the line. And so when chronic illness first started creeping in after we left the church, because I thought leaving the church would solve all my problems. I thought, now that I'm out of this environment, and I'm discovering some of the religious trauma that I'd experienced from a young age up until, you know, my late 20s. I thought, oh, that'll dissipate now that I'm out of that environment. But really, it gave my body permission to feel exactly how it was feeling while I was in a toxic state, while I was in an environment that didn't allow me to process how my body was feeling or acknowledge how my body was feeling or reconnect with my body in a healthy way. It was much easier for me to defend my behavior and to push down those feelings. So when I removed myself from that environment and I was finding rest, I had more time in my day-to-day schedule. My body finally had the space to say, hey, all these years, for the past 30 years, hello, this is what's been happening in here, and we've been trying to get your attention, and now you've finally got some space to hear what we have to say. So that came out very practically for me, and I think it would be different for everybody. But I developed severe insomnia rather quickly. I've always had trouble sleeping, but it ramped up, and there was a period of about 6 months where I was sleeping 1 to 2 broken hours a night. And I was relying heavily on over-the-counter sleeping pills, and nothing was working. It was awful. It showed up in gut issues, hives, lots of little complaints that were very disruptive that no doctor could explain away. So that kind of is the banner of chronic illness, right? All these little symptoms that come together and there's a few words that can be band-aided across them, but no real pathway out of them. And I remember my doctor just saying to me, you know, this could be it. Like, this could be it. And me thinking in my early 30s with 2 little kids, this can't be it. Like, I can't feel like this forever. There's got to be something more. And so then I started to play. I found a new doctor, started to play with a few different things. And I didn't make the connection that it was a result from those years of trauma in the church for a couple of years. So when the chronic illness was really bad at its height, I was able to temper it with diet therapy. I was able to temper it with some talk therapy, some supplements. And I got to a point in my healing. I was sleeping better. I was feeling a little bit more regulated, but it wasn't until I made the connection with another therapist that trauma is stored in the body, and a lot of this is your well-being. You can think of your body and what the capacity for trauma and challenge is. Your well is overflowing. And it wasn't until I made that connection that I started to engage in some mind-body therapies that really, not completed. I don't think we're ever truly healed, in the sense that we're living a life in a body on the earth. And so there's always going to be things. I see healing now more as a way of life, not a means to an end. And so I'm constantly healing. I'm constantly engaging my body, asking it questions, reading its signs, and trying to get at what it needs. It's not a once-off thing. This is now a way of life for me. And so that's sort of where I have landed from that journey.
Mm. Oh, I mean, spiritual burnout is real. Hey, like we don't talk about that enough. You know, the exploitation of volunteers and church staff in a lot of spaces is just, you know, heartbreaking and so damaging. I mean, we know that the effects of burnout is damaging to your body in general. When you add a layer to that it is identity rooted and that suffering is somehow a spiritual success, it is so dangerous, and it just is going to eventually wreak havoc on the body that you're moving through the world. I want to ask this question to both of you because I think, you know, hearing differing perspectives on this is what is the best part of this podcast, really. But what was it like starting to connect that what was happening in your body was trauma related, and then start doing therapy from a body perspective, not just a mind perspective? So I'm gonna leave it to whoever wants to jump in first on that question.
We're too polite, Erica. You go for it, babe.
I don't want to talk over anyone.
Oh.
I'm happy to go though.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm like, one of us has to do it. Do you know, I think for me, when I really realized that it was living in my body, and, you know, Liz sort of said like too much information before, and you know, I'll give that warning now, but for me, it very much came about around that purity culture. I was married very young, and still with my husband. We just actually celebrated our 20-year wedding anniversary, but which is wild.
Beautiful.
But married very young, and very much had been raised in that purity culture of, you know, well, we all know what it is. And that was where I really came unstuck as a, you know, grown-up woman in a marriage, and I just couldn't make that work. Like, I was so ashamed of my body. I was so ashamed of sex in general, and it created a lot of problems for me. So I think that's the first time I really made that connection, and that was quite close to, I guess, the time that I had like left the church. And if I'm honest, I really didn't heal that for a very long time. I didn't even know what to do. Like, I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know where to go. I did connect with a few therapists, but never really got that far. And the thing, ironically, that actually felt more of a healing in that sense was when I birthed my first baby. That was the healing thing for me. And I still haven't quite put the pieces together as to why, but I think it was something around feeling really powerful as a woman and being like, this can't be bad, because there's so much power in being a woman. And so for me, it was less, I guess, therapy at that time. I've done a lot more since then, but that was a huge thing for me. But I mean, I didn't have my first baby till, well, I mean, I was still fairly young. I think I was 29 when I had my first baby. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like that this was a problem for a short period of time. It was a problem for a really long period of time. But it was definitely the first time that I went, oh, this is trauma. Like, and I maybe didn't have those words, but it was like very much like, God, the after effects of this live in my body, because it doesn't matter what I think up here. I can't convince myself through my brain. It just doesn't work. And then I found myself, it's interesting, I found myself in the yoga world. So I've been a yoga teacher since 2010, I think. And that world in certain pockets is not at all dissimilar to the world of the church. And so I found myself kind of having this mirrored situation where I was like, the thing I left seems to have followed me into this new world and I don't like it. And so I think for a long time, my yoga practice was also a way of, it sounds kind of crazy, but it was a way of distracting myself from my body.
Definitely.
And it wasn't until I learned to use my movement practice as a way of getting into and listening to my body that things changed. So I can't really point to a particular moment or a particular therapeutic practice or a particular thing that I did. But for me, it was very much learning, this movement practice, this mindfulness is not a way of like getting out of myself. It's a way of getting into myself. And that's going to be messy, much messier than a 60-minute, quick asana class is going to give me the space for. So I think it was, very much for me a slow hum of change. It wasn't a big like boom of change. Yeah, it's ongoing. Like Liz said, I don't think there's a point where you go, done. Even like I'm 41 years old now, so I've been out of the church longer than I was in it. And it still impacts me. If not daily, every other day, it's still there. And I think that's remarkable in so many ways and really deeply sad as well. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Sam, but that hopefully paints a little bit of a picture of what you asked me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just about, I think, hearing people's personal stories, because I think too often, books are great and theory is great and education is great, but we live as human beings and we don't live the way that the books write a lot of the time. And so I think for people to understand what it is like to start that reconnection journey, I hate the word journey. As I said it, I was like, oh, that's such a gross one. um, I don't know what to replace that with yet. I haven't worked that out. Path. Let's go with path. I don't know that that's any better. But that reconnection experience through life. I think we learn so much more from hearing how other people are living it as well, because that shared experience and that connection of going, oh my gosh, I get that. Like I've had that. Yeah, Liz, what was that reconnection process, or the beginning of that process where you started to step into those mind-body exercises and therapies? What was that like for you?
It was like learning a whole new way of life, to be honest. I remember when we first, I think I spoke about it on our previous episode, Sam, that my husband and I had very different experiences leaving the church.
Mm.
I'd been in church since I was young, very, very little. Like I said, he became a Christian when he was 21. So he had a little bit less exposure than I did. Had a bit of religion in his younger years, but not quite as churched as what I had experienced. So our deconstruction paths were very different, and took different capacity from both of us to find our own individual ways. So when, I don't know how much to say. So when we quit church, we were both working for the church. We quit our jobs. We said, we were campus pastors. We were like, we'll be back in a month. We're going to take a holiday and we're going to be back in a month. In that month holiday, we were finally able to feel what we were really feeling. The dissonance got a voice. Our feelings got a voice. And I love my husband for this. I'm a very different creature. I'm an Enneagram 4. I'm a highly sensitive person. I just did an empathy test with my therapist, and I'm in the 95th percentile for empathy. So sometimes it's really difficult for me to pinpoint how I feel because I'm so busy picking up everybody else's feelings. He's the complete opposite. He's like, this is what's happening. This is how I feel. And this is what I'm doing. So he was like on that holiday, I'm not going back ever. You go back if you want to. I'm done. And I remember growing up in the church, seeing a lot of women who were there without their husbands, right? This was a bit of a stereotypical, lady in the church. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be that lady going to church without my husband in the church. But when I had that thought, there was like an ache, and it wasn't about going to church without my husband. It was about going to church. And when he was like, I'm not going anymore, and we would talk about it, I just noticed, this was the first time really, I just noticed how much relief flooded through my body. And I remember thinking, I don't have any fight in me to go to church without him, to have the arguments of how we're spending our time, to want him to come to church with me. I'm like, I'm not interested in any of that. And I was completely baffled because I'd grown up a pastor's kid. I was a pastor. I'd given myself, my body, my blood, my sweat, my tears, everything to this place for nearly 30 years. And yet the thought of not going, there was something happening in me that I couldn't name, but I somehow managed to follow that feeling. And I often say to Jessie, I would never have been able to leave the church if you hadn't had left first. And so sometimes I think the journey out, we feel like we have to do it all by ourselves, or it has to be done a certain way, or you're not brave unless you come up with it in your own way. But I guess my little encouragement around that is it's not shameful if there's scaffolding around you, if there's structure around you, if you chain your wagon to somebody else's experience that you feel is healthy, that you're aligned with, that's helping you. That's okay to do. It doesn't have to be whiz bang miracle, breaking off chains in an instant kind of a process. It's very much, I believe, a what do you call it? Like a following the crumbs, following the hints, left foot, right foot, next right thing, not a whole protocol of here I am, this is where I want to be, let's devise a plan to get there. It's very much like a choose your own adventure type situation. So that first time that my body was filled with relief, I just tried to follow it as closely as I could. And then about 6 months into our deconstruction journey, the Liturgist podcast was birthed with Michael Gungor and Mike McCarg. And I remember listening to those episodes. It was my husband's birthday, bottle of wine, candles, podcasts, deconstruction. I'd never heard anybody talk about it before. And we just sat there crying like babies, feeling like we weren't alone. So I think surrounding yourself or trying to find people who are experiencing similar things. It's why these conversations are so important, because it was one of the only ways I found my own way out, was connecting with the journey and stories of others, not to follow in their footsteps, but to glean their courage and to know that it's okay to follow my own path. It's okay to crawl my way out of this until I can walk, until I can skip and jump and dance and do all of those sorts of things. So that was sort of how it began, was trusting that sense of relief in my body.
Yeah. I think, I will often say to my clients, slow is fast. We can't get there immediately,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And when you are like, I'm also sort of thinking like when you are taught so heavily to divert everything in terms of like thoughts, beliefs, values, everything to either father, husband, pastor, God, essentially some form of generally male authority, um, you can't just step out of that and suddenly know how to listen to you and know how to listen to what you want and what you need. Most of the time, you don't even know if that's what you wanted or what you like, or whether it's just what you were supposed to like because of the picture that you were supposed to fit. And so for me, similarly, it was about, diverting to women, particularly. I wanted to start like, let's start shifting the gender alignment to start with, and people who were not telling you what to do in terms of like the church often will teach you what to think, not how to think. And so like diverting to people, not for their sense of authority, but just for their sense of how they were experiencing the world. And, I remember quite early on, Joy Vetterline, who was my first guest for the podcast, was that person. And it is about, um, shifting to people who allow you to crawl on your own, even if you stumble also. Who are teaching, not dictating. And I think that that's a really big difference in terms of that diversion of trust and authority. And yeah, obviously the ultimate aim is that our authority and trust comes from within, but we can't get there immediately. Like it's, I would love to say that, by the end of this episode, we'll have like a 10-step plan for you to get to that place. But it's just, that's not the reality. And it doesn't mean that you won't get there, but it means that your body will take you as fast or as slow as you need to go. Yeah, I think like in terms of like, I didn't pre-warn Erica about this question, so apologies. But I've just thought in terms of like people who are out of the church or who might even still be in it and just wrestling with things, not necessarily feeling like there is, complete alignment as they usually had. What can people look for within themselves in terms of signs that this is something that they should move towards? Like, how do they know that for themselves?
Yeah, so how do they know that perhaps where they are isn't serving them? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of what Liz was just talking about in terms of paying attention to the things that you feel in your body. And I think Liz, really, your example was so perfect because it brings up contrast, right? I have this thought of like, well, I could go back to church or I could not go back to church. And each of those will have a feeling associated with it. And so I really like to use those sorts of scenarios to be like, well, what if you just get curious? Let's forget about the fact that your brain's going to give you some sort of narrative about what you should do. Let's just see if we can say, like, I value your thoughts, but let's just pop them to one side for now. Let's turn the volume down on that. And when you say those things to yourself, like, I'm going to go back to church or I'm not going to go back to church, what do you feel? And you don't have to know what it means, but just describe what the feelings are, right? Oh, I've noticed that there's a tightness in my chest. Okay, we don't need to know what it means yet, but that's interesting. What does your chest feel like when you think about the other alternative? Okay, cool. Like that's some really interesting information. So I think the thing to be on the lookout for are feelings that you can be curious about, that you can explore within contrast. Because the contrast, I think, can help you to have something to essentially compare against, right? Whereas when we're kind of just thinking like there's one path, I've always gone to church, so I'll always go to church. The things that are happening in your body are probably very familiar. They might have already been happening, right? There might have already been a constriction every Sunday morning when you woke up and put your clothes on. But if that's how you always feel, then you haven't got anything to compare it to. And I know I went a number of years with really high anxiety, and I felt anxious all the time. Like there was no waking moment when I wasn't anxious. And so it was normal. It was just regular, that just was the normal feeling. And so sometimes we have to be willing to do something or think something, or just to kind of like open up a possibility of like, what if? So that we can see what the contrast is. So my number one tip, I know you didn't ask for a tip really around that, but my number one tip would be like, what if you simply just commit to being more curious? You do not have to make any kind of decisions. You don't have to do anything at all. But what if you can just be curious and be like, well, if my body, I always like to use that, like, okay, let's just imagine for a moment that your body is trying to communicate with you and that it is working for your greater good. Let's just say that that's true and play an experiment. What do you notice then in the way that it communicates with you? The narrative that my body is my enemy, my body's always working against me, my body's just like breaking, and, that kind of narrative is what we have to sort of step outside of. And it doesn't happen just because I tell you that your body's working for you. So the curiosity piece is the most important part, because you can just play with the idea, what if? Yeah. I'm willing to just sit with what if for a moment, because I can always come back and pick up my long-standing beliefs. That's fine. So yeah, curiosity, contrast, and playing with this notion of what if, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. I'm going to share the load of unexpected questions and throw one to Liz, because I know that there are going to be people out there listening to what Erica just said and go, yeah, but curiosity is dangerous, right? That's like, and fearing the curiosity because of what they've been taught about questions and about the world, and to just essentially fear anything that is not of God immediately. And so I'm wondering whether you can speak to that fear around curiosity and actually even just getting to the point of even just feeling that there are different sensations in your body, and yeah, that fear that is around that for a lot of people.
Oh, so many people, myself included. So I completely agree with everything that you said, Erica. That's been my experience. And I think it can still be really hard, that gateway of curiosity, because we're taught so in fundamentalist spaces, whether they're religious, educational, familial, fundamentalism, I think, is the root problem of a lot of toxic spaces. And fundamentalism is where there is one way, there is one authority figure. It's really boiled down to a basic, authority figure, lemmings, you do what you're told, everything works. And I think a lot of religious spaces behave that way now. Maybe not for people who just attend, but definitely for people who are involved in running a fundamentalist church of any kind, Pentecostal, evangelical, Catholic, Uniting, Anglican, whatever. They can all be places of fundamentalism. So to really engage that curiosity piece, that can often be the hardest wall to break through for people, because we're not taught to question. We're actually taught not to engage critical awareness. I think we spoke about that last time, Sam, that critical awareness is a sin because you are exiting the program, the dogma and the doctrine. You can't question that. Yeah. So to recapture that critical awareness piece for me was, or the curiosity piece for me and the critical awareness piece for me, was probably the hardest part of the work. Luckily for me, my work in writing daily Bible devotions really helped me there, because in studying and crafting these pieces, I came across a lot of history from Jewish culture and Judaism and how the Bible was originally written and taught that really broke apart some of the things that I was taught in Pentecostalism. And so the way that Jewish people encounter and engage the Bible is full of curiosity. It is full of questions. And if you're not questioning what a leader has spoken to you or has told you, in a lot of Judaism, Jewish circles, they would say that you don't have faith if you're not questioning, which was a real contrast to the way that I was brought up. But when I started learning these things alongside the idea that God is big and mysterious and you can't box God and God is all powerful, which I was also taught, but I could never really connect how we couldn't question God. Like, you can't question God because he's so big. But I'm like, God is so big that our questions can fit inside the paradigm. So I think that was the first place where my curiosity was like, got the tick of approval of my path, my journey, whatever we want to call it now, where I went, oh, actually, this can be a spiritual practice. This can actually be a sign of someone who has faith, whatever kind of, not religious faith, not Christian faith, just faith, just the hope, just the idea that there is something out there that I don't know, and my curiosity will connect me to it. And then I started realizing that my life was just not working. And so I think when you give yourself space to analyze and ask yourself your questions, which having that month off from church was a gift when we first left. And maybe that could be a great practical piece of advice, is if you can give yourself some space to really sink into these feelings. You don't have to know the answer. It's not about finding answers. It's about digging more into the reality of your situation. And so in that month, we really allowed ourselves to go, you know what? Our life isn't working. We've got 2 little kids. We're both working 60, 70-hour weeks, 2 little kids earning the shittest money that you could imagine. How are we going to make our life work? Like, where is this going to go? We started asking ourselves, if we stay on this path, where are we going to end up? Because I think a lot of church, religious culture, sorry, I'm so long-winded, is is urgent. You're living week to week. It's week to week finances. It's week to week schedule. It's week to week. We just have to get through this weekend. We just have to get through this weekend. We just have to get through it. We really weren't planning for our future at all. And so giving ourselves time and space to go, who are we? What do we want to be? And is the path we're on going to get us there? That can often be a really great gateway to being able to engage that curiosity, to be able to go, well, what if one of us quit? What if we both quit? And I want to say too, and then I'll be done, that quitting didn't happen overnight. So I shared the story in the first podcast episode with Sam. When new pastors took over our church and we were still working for the church, we gave it 2 years. We had a conversation with each other, my husband and I. Let's give it 2 years and we'll see what happens. So for 2 years, we were on board. We were there every week. We were explaining away all of the things, all of the dissonance. But we were really digging into this for a very long time. And then when my husband said, I think I'm going to quit, it was still 6 months until he quit. So I loved what you said, Sam. Fast is slow. No, slow is fast. Always do that. Thanks, Craig. Slow is fast. In a miracle-driven culture and an urgent-driven culture, it can be really difficult to give yourself space and time. And curiosity cannot live in urgency. So removing yourself from that urgent, I've got to know now, I've got to get where's the silver bullet that's going to fix everything? No silver bullet, guys, sorry. And I really don't think that the real miracles are the whiz-bang ones. I think the real miracles are being able to stay in that dissonant place. They are being able to find that sense of curiosity in a prescriptive world. Like, that's a freaking miracle right there. So being able to give yourself some space and some time and some permission that's where that curiosity might be able to begin for you.
Yeah. I mean, if people have not learnt by now also, the three of us are not structured people. Like, we just like sit here and chat for like days upon days. I'm going to sort of merge something that you said a moment ago, Liz, with something that I know that Erica does, because I think that the church attracts a particular type of person also, right? So Liz, you mentioned that you're an Enneagram 4, which I also am. I don't know, Erica, what Enneagram you are, but I know that you are you okay. Yeah, okay. So all fours, we are in good company. The great Dr. Laura Anderson, who is known as she's like religious trauma expert, is also Enneagram 4. I feel like we are a nice, good company here. But the church attracts a particular type of person, which is often the compassionate, the empathic, the giving, the generous. And Erica, I know that you work in particular with the highly sensitive community, which I also am. And so I'm wondering whether you can just speak to for a moment to the people who, like, sometimes listening to your body can be really freaking overwhelming. Like, and everything is feels like it's, really overwhelming, really high, really intense. And actually tuning into what your body is saying can be a really jarring experience at times. So I'm wondering whether you can sort of speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. What I want to say to create some context around that, or to create some hope around that maybe, is that whilst the church perhaps does attract the highly sensitive, and if not the church, then the yoga spaces and other places where perhaps there are similar vibes at times, it's also the superpower that you possess to get yourself out. So I think it's important to point that out at the start, because sometimes it can feel, I think especially when you are learning what it means to be highly sensitive, it can feel like a real crutch, it can feel like a really unfortunate thing. But it is incredibly powerful. And I personally believe that it was my sensitivity that kind of made me go, hang on a minute, this isn't right, so I think I just want to create that context. But I guess you're so spot on. When you are highly sensitive, when you are empathic, and like Liz said, sometimes it's bloody hard to tell the difference between like what is mine and what is yours. Like that can be incredibly difficult. So the thing that I always like to work on with my highly sensitive clients is finding a way to ground. And that can be very literal grounding, grounding into where your body connects with whatever you're sitting on or standing on. Or it can be a part of your body that has a sense of depth and connection to you. Because often the anxiety will live in various places, or the worry, or the fear, or the am I doing it right, or the do they like me, or are they okay, can live in certain parts of our body that feel quite all-consuming. But if we are curious and we pay attention, we will often find like a little island where that is just not true. It doesn't exist. So for me, that's right deep down in my belly. And often when I'm stressed out, I will notice that I crunch around it. I almost protect that place. And so I have to look for it. I have to be willing to go, oh, I know that place exists. And if I can find it, then it doesn't actually matter everything else that's going on. I mean, it does matter. That's a little bit flippant. It does matter, but I have a refuge from it. I can withstand it because I know that it's not all of me. It isn't the only thing that exists. But when sort of tuning into your body feels overwhelming, then that's where I would go to like your periphery. Where does your bum connect with the chair? Where do your feet connect with the floor? Can you literally hold your hand on the wall and push on it and find something in your peripheral? Because often being highly sensitive can feel like you're trying to float off into the ether. There's sort of this, energy that really is upward. And so we need to balance that out with finding a way to like tether ourselves to the earth, essentially, and tether ourselves to our intuition, into our knowing. Because those things that make it uncomfortable being a highly sensitive person are also the things that make you incredibly good at picking up on bullshit, incredibly good at knowing when not to walk down that alley, incredibly good at knowing when something isn't right for you and when to walk away. But often you're also so wrapped up in what will please other people, and that will be at odds with what your body's telling you. And so to be able to anchor, to be able to just go, I don't, like Liz said again, like that, to be patient and go, I don't have to have the answer now, but can I at least ground into something that's real, something that is distinct from the overwhelm? Then we have the space to go, okay, well, when I am able to make a decision, at least I'm grounded into something. I'm not being kind of pulled and tugged by my thoughts. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And also, like, I think, yeah, high sensitivity gets a bad rap sometimes. And yeah, it can create, challenges, but everything can have challenges accompanied with it. I remember my therapist first put it as that it meant that I had a finely tuned nervous system. And that was language that I understood, being like coming from a musical background. Like, you want a finely tuned instrument, right? Like, that's the perfect kind of instrument that you want. And so to have a finely tuned nervous system actually means that, that's not a disservice to your system. That's actually the reason why it can work in such harmony. And I agree in that. Yeah, I think your high sensitivity and that empathic nature means that you do spot the bullshit and you go, yeah, that doesn't feel quite right. And I think that that's the superpower of that sensitivity. One of the things that I love people to get out of these podcasts is something that they can take away, whether it's a word of encouragement or, in this case, being like a practical tip or a tool in terms of what's something that was really helpful, really healing, really effective, or just really enjoyable also, because like we can have fun in life and not everything needs to be serious. In terms of being able to help you not just listen to your body, but reconnect and come back home to your body. So I'll throw to Liz first.
One of the things that I found really powerful from the get-go was just really simple breathing exercises. And it's like what you were saying, Erica, finding something that you can ground yourself in. And I started learning about the vagus nerve and the mind-body connection really powerfully through breath. I think a lot of people, when they start on it, any kind of healing journey, whether they're healing from a physical illness, trauma, we want the silver bullet and we want it now, and we want it to be some grand, big, you've got this thing and this is the fix. But a lot of the time, a healing journey is just a step-by-step, breath by breath, moment by moment situation where you're following, the crumbs, the hints that are in front of you. And so just starting from that real home base of the breath, of this is what I have right now. I actually have tattooed on my arm a little saying. It just says, here I am. Because I think for a long time in the church, I was always, I'm going to be in heaven one day. I'm doing this to get into heaven. We're going to one day have this massive church. I'm one day going to have this huge church career. What about those sins I committed 10 years ago? So to actually ground myself in the present moment with my breath, finding your home. I listen to this meditation coach a lot, and he uses that word home base. And I love what you said, Erica, because it sounds like your home base lives in your belly, We all have one. We all have a place. And for me, it's my breath, feeling my breath going in and out of my chest when I feel like I'm anxiety spiraling, when I don't know what I'm feeling, when I'm not sure what's next. Home base, home base, home base. I just breathe. One of the other things that I found really powerful, which is taught by a social worker in the US named Nicole Sachs, is stream of consciousness journaling. And so I practice it when I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed, when I'm not really sure what's going on, when my physical symptoms are bouncing around, where you say the things that you feel like you can't say, or you don't even know what you want to say. And most horrific things come out in my stream of consciousness journaling, but it's stuff that's in my body that I obviously feel like I can't get out because what will people think? No woman speaks like that. Like, it's full of the C word, the F word, all the words. Like, and then it has things in it like I've written, I hate being a mum, because there are moments where I hate. Sorry, I'm whispering as if there are children in the room, but there are moments that is a truth for me. And if I let it live in my body and ashamed of it, there's power there. So stream of consciousness journaling, getting out those thoughts, getting out those feelings. And I just set a timer for 20 minutes on my phone, on my iPad. I type like a mad freaking woman, and then I delete it because it's out of my system now. It's a ritual. It's out of my system. It's on the page. And then what is on the page may or may not be true. They're thoughts. They may or may not be true. So we're just going to delete them and we're going to move on. And so alongside that is this idea from Rilke. So I'm giving you three things: that no feeling is final. And that has just become such a mantra for my life. No feeling is final. No feeling is final. I'll tear up just thinking about it, because whenever I feel like I'm in a panic, or, oh my God, everything's ruined, or I'm on the mountaintop and it's always going to be like this, no feeling is final. No feeling is final. Everything evolves. Everything moves. It won't always be like this, in good and bad ways. Like, that's become a bit of a touchstone for me.
Yeah.
So there we go.
I love that. Yeah. Erica, what's been particularly helpful for you?
I love the examples that Liz shared. I had written breath down as well, and I think that's a really important one. And I've also found that sometimes people come to me and they're like, I can't focus on my breath, it makes me feel worse, which I think is an important thing to consider when we're thinking about somatic practices. Anything that is of the body, we have to then listen to, okay, well, how does my body respond? So I like to be able to say, well, have a whole bunch in your toolkit, right? Which I love that Liz gave 3, because you want to have multiples, because even your go-to, sometimes you'll be like, well, this just isn't hitting, right? You know, so it's important to have things in your tool belt. I would say that, like, a couple of my favorites are literally moving my body. And I want to give a really simple example. So I obviously teach mindful movement, and I teach something called somatic exercise, which is really just about, it's a little bit more complex than this, but it's really about effort contrasted with ease. And so I like to do things like literally just rolling my shoulders in really slow circles and recognizing what a gift that is to my body. Our bodies thrive on movement. They love it. They need it. It's how information gets from our brain to from our body to our brain. It relies on movement. And so something as simple as making your way through the joints of your body and just moving them and noticing, well, what does it feel like when I tense that part of me? Oh, and what does it feel like when I let it go? That's been a practice that is a staple for me, and it feels very nourishing just to do simple things like that. So that would be one that I would recommend for sure, because you don't have to turn a video on to do that. You don't have to have any really specific sequence in mind. You can literally just be like, even where do I just feel a little bit sore? I'm going to move that, you know? So just very simple, responsive movement in the body. And then I would go back to what I said before, grounding. You know, can I feel the effect of gravity, essentially? Like, can I let myself be held? And really practicing, what does it feel like to give permission to the thing that I'm sitting on, standing on, lying on, to really hold me, and to trust in the stability of that thing. Because so often when we are worried, anxious, sad, we're sort of, like I said, trying to levitate, and the effort of responding to that can feel so upward. And so practicing, what does it feel like? Where do I feel pressure? Where is there actually no pressure between my body and this thing that I'm on? And where is there something in between? So we can start to notice like volumes in our body. Oh, there's a really loud amount of pressure under my left bum cheek sitting on this chair. The pressure in my right bum cheek is there, but it's much less, right? And then there's space. There's a little bit of space behind, so it's kind of like noticing that the subtleties. I think that's a really nice way into grounding ourselves, but then also learning to listen to the information from our body in a slightly more complex way than just it hurts or it feels fine, like kind of being able to listen to the volumes, I think is really, really valuable. So grounding and moving, they're my two tips.
I love that. And yeah, and I think I love the way that you describe the grounding, because I think when we use that term, um I mean, I just have like the imagery in my head of like the sign, like name 5 things that you can see and things that you can hear. And whilst all of, like, I say that with like sarcasm, but like they can be super helpful, but sometimes it, like at some point grounding can actually be much more than that, and can be much more of a whole body experience than that, and more layered and complex than just noticing your surroundings and what's happening outside of you, grounding into what's happening inside of you. So I love the way that you've sort of, explored that and teased it out into becoming a much more expanded concept, probably for a lot of people. Now, I will obviously have all of this in the show notes, but if people want to connect with you, where can they find you? I'll throw to Erica first.
Awesome. So I have a website, ericawebb.com.au. I'm at ericawebb_selfkind on Instagram. And I have a podcast as well, which is called Self-Kind with Erica Webb. So if you just search my name, you'll find me. I've been online long enough that I'm fairly easy to find. So yeah, I would love, come and connect. And if you've got questions, I'm very willing to, have a chat as well. And thank you, Sam, for having us.
Thanks, Erica. Liz?
You can find me at my website. It's called thepracticeco.com. I'm at The Practice Co on Instagram, but same, if you search my name, you'll find me on all the socials and the website. I'd love to see you there.
Love
Oh,
that.
and I should say, because I always forget, because I'm terrible, I have an app and it's called The Practice Co, and you should go subscribe. I'm terrible at marketing my own stuff. It's the best way to support my work, and also it's a daily inspirational place to help you find a sense of groundedness and spirituality in your own beautiful ordinary life. So that's where I am.
And I mean, it's wonderful. And for those who might be cautious, because I know that there are people out there who might be, there's no overt biblical jargon or gross language, right? And and as like a taster, just Liz's newsletters are probably one of my favorite thing. They're just,
including the spelling errors. They're some of your
yes,
favorites.
including pointing out the spelling errors.
I'm renowned for them.
And so, if there is some caution, and I understand where people have those cautions, make that your taster in terms of what to expect. And I think in anything, when it comes to healing from religious trauma, I think self-compassion is at the paramount. And Erica's podcast gives that in spades. So please go out and support these wonderful women, and thank you both for joining me. I appreciate it. And I'm sure that people have gotten many things out of this bonus episode. So thank you both.
Oh, it's my joy and privilege. Thanks so much for having us, Sam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.